it seems like it's almost like a joke, sort of, where you have to go almost opposite of it sometimes in order for that circumstance to then come around, because it's like the wanting of it and it not being there keeps spiraling out the lack or the like negative thought, and it pushes it away. And then the acceptance of almost like, maybe I will never have that, or maybe this just is how it is, or maybe I need to let go of whatever expectation, and then all of a sudden the thing can come in.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Your Superior Self. Today, I have the great Lona Cook on the show. She's coming back for a second time because her practice is thriving, her philosophy is forever evolving, and I just love following her on social media. So, Lona, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Trey. I love being back.
What have you been up to since we last talked? I think it was like maybe, I don't know if it was a year ago or 6 months or so. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to think that too. Oh, we've been up to a lot of stuff. We're having a big year here in business and life and practice. And I was just telling you, like, with my kids and my husband, we've traveled a lot more this year. So we've been having a lot of fun, but also it's been a year of really like pushing out some things, and that's been fun to like kind of step into some new projects, or at least move projects to the next level. So it's been I love a December because it's fun to look back and see like, what did we get done in the last, 11, 12 months?
What are you pushing out right now?
Yeah. So we're creating an online school that's called Innately You. And the school it's starting as a platform more for holistic practitioners, with the goal that it will be for anyone, and learning more about like innate healing and connecting to the energy that is you, that heals you, and opening up kind of a space where there'll be different school classes available, but also community groups to like just have support of like-minded people, and resources for like developing not only your repertoire of how you look at healing, but also how do you put that into like a brick and mortar practice if you have a brick and mortar practice, or we all are going through different things that we feel contraction over sometimes when we're setting up a business or things like that. Like, so other people can help you that have similar philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Just thinking about where you are now, as far as a practitioner and where you started, right? Like, how much has your spirituality, like, how much is it intertwined with your professional life?
Oh, I feel like the deeper I go in trying to understand healing, the more I recognize that everything is spiritual. So, um, you couldn't separate the two at this point. Meaning like, even like I go to a meeting and that is, a spiritual embodiment of people coming together, and my energy has like co-created that experience. So to me, it's all spiritual. Mm-hmm.
Mm. And just to give people context, she is a chiropractor, but she is very holistic in her philosophy, which I love, right? So going back to you attracting this, right? Like, when you got into the chiropractic game, were
Mm-hmm.
you that spiritual?
No, definitely not. I would say I've always been open-minded, in the sense of curious, I guess. But I grew up in a traditional like Lutheran family. My dad had been Catholic, so he was kind of like the traditional like Catholic who left and was somewhat traumatized from his Catholic school. And I remember somewhere in the mix, I had a relationship where his parent was a reverend, and it was a really interesting time for me because there was so many things I was experiencing, both in what I was learning in school, but also through just life experiences that helped me to start questioning lots of things. And how so many, how do I want to say this? So many things that we chalk up as religion sometimes are almost like doing more damage than they are good. And so, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I wanted to understand more. So I became more curious. Like, I started going to different church services, and I definitely noticed that like there were places that you felt something different than when you went to other places. And I remember I went with his family to a service where it was done in Spanish. And so I don't understand most Spanish, meaning like I can catch a word here and there. So by and large, I couldn't understand what the service was.
Mhm.
And then they asked for people to come up and have a laying of hands. And I watched people fainting. And, coming from a like Lutheran, Norwegian, German background, like nobody's fainting at church, And so it was quite an experience for me, where I was like, and we went up there, and I felt the people who were facilitating it put their hands around me, and I got so hot and I started crying, and I'm not a crier. And I was very skeptical walking up there, and yet I could not deny that like something moved me at the time. And so anyways, that's kind of like the soul searching I had started on, is figuring out like, what do I believe? Why do I feel one way when I'm sitting somewhere and not feel that when I go to a different congregation? And anyways, lo and behold, kind of getting back to your original question, I was open-minded enough to know that I had curiosity to find out more. And then as I started going down rabbit holes in health and healing, I realized so much of the great text of the world, as well as like healing philosophies, are in many ways saying the same thing. And there's almost like different storylines to say them, but they're kind of hinting at all the same truths, which is like, you carry the power, and the power is your connection to God or the infinite or whatever you want to call it. And your acknowledgement of this God within is part of what leads to healing, whether you're conscious of it or not. And so, yeah, I think one of the things that I love the most now is getting to hold space for people in our practice, especially those who are starting to wake up to their own power, because then we get to have some really fun conversations too. And that keeps it really creative and interesting for me.
That's so awesome. Like I can't even like, all right, so people dance around that, right? Like the idea that we are connected to that source, to the God that of our childhood, right? Like to even think that we are that makes people feel guilty and uncomfortable, because we're programmed with these ideas that we're not worthy enough to be a human being. We're sinners, let alone something as powerful as the universe, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
I mean, what did that evolution look like, right? Like, were there concepts that were presented to you that were kind of like, oh, well, like through your healing journey, like did something pop out where you were like, yeah, no doubt, this is what we are?
Yeah. Oh, there was quite a few different things. If I kind of like sit with that, the thing that immediately popped in, and I think you and I discussed this book the first time, but it is hands down probably the most pivotal series of books I've read. And that's David Hawkins' work, Power versus Force, Truth versus Falsehood, that's using the body and like the ideas of applied kinesiology, but essentially like we are our own tuning fork for truth, like a truth meter, essentially. And for some people that seems so subjective, but he does such a beautiful job of making it very rational, how he went through the process of the study he did. And he was a psychiatrist who looked at human states of emotion, as well as he figured out how to kind of quantify things. Anyways, in some of his work, he gets into how some of these great enlightened masters, Jesus Christ, Buddha, Lord Krishna, he goes through a list of them, were like, on the human scale of consciousness, they were ascended, they were enlightened, and they vibrated at like pure consciousness. And he describes like what the human scale is like. And people who are moving into those higher states carry so much power, enough that they basically neutralize a lot of low energy that also exists in our world, because there's light and there's dark. And that's part of our existence, and it's in us too, which is like the sin, if you want to call it that. And so I think his work helped me understand that there is so much truth in the religions, but then we take it and we filter it through many other people's consciousness. And that sets up all these structures, and some of them are not that truth filled, or at least create a lot of divisiveness in the process. And so I think that was really an important book for me, because it allowed me to take a lot of what I was learning in healing and understand why someone whose vibrational state is in anger or sadness or fear or grief or shame is not going to have the same experience as someone who's at peace or neutrality or what have you, right? Like that we're working with totally different energy fields. And then so I was learning that, and then, questioning some beliefs, as well as just going deeper in like my own connection, meditation, etc. And I also started to go really deep into like where chiropractic began. And so the original chiropractor, and this is like the really juicy part of chiropractic that almost nobody knows because they don't even teach us it in school. But the original guy, his name was D.D. Palmer. He was a practicing spiritualist, and like, to set the stage, it was like end of the 1800s. A lot of people had lost family members in the Civil War. And so they would have like seances, essentially. So he was into figuring out magnetic pull in the body. So he was a magnetic healer. And then his wife is like his third wife, was a big practicing spiritualist. So he got pulled into the spiritualist camp. Well, anyways, the juicy part is he says that he had channeled a deceased medical doctor who told him to look to the spine for the cause of dis-ease within the human system, and that was like where it was at. And so, like, again, it's just like, that's like mind-blowing to me when we learn that then you read his text and like all the stuff that he was studying, and it was on like auras and the magnetic poles in the body, and much more of like this idea almost of like a quantum system, but there wasn't that type of science out there yet. So he was just like so ahead of his time. And so as I was going into that and looking at like when we do an adjustment to the spine, the whole reason we're working on that is to basically do like kind of a reboot to that nervous system or that spinal cord system. And that's like the energy conduit. So, it's just a lot of that was pivotal for me to realize like, okay, we can learn all of this in kind of a medical language, like nerve plexuses and like all the things we had to learn to pass our boards. But when we look at where we came from and we study some of this other, understanding of like human energy states, that started to really bring this whole idea of like physical health, physical body, spiritual health, spiritual bodies, and let me know like you can't separate the two.
Yeah, I was listening to his book today, actually. It's Letting Go, of how we can free ourselves from internal states of emotion. Yeah. So classic. It is such a classic, because I struggle with that too, right? Like I was reading some philosophy in an ethics class, and I can't remember how you say his name. It's like Epictetus or something, where he basically says like the only meaning that your thoughts have are what you give it, right? And we have no responsibility to what you're thinking, anything outside of me, whoever, what they say, I have no control of that. The only thing I have control of is my choice of how I'm going to show up in life, right? Like it doesn't matter what your environment is. It could be chaos, but you have a decision. Like the only thing you can control in that chaos is how you're going to show up. Are you going to allow it to affect your internal state of whatever that emotion is? And it's tough. A lot of people, like Jesus was teaching this kind of stuff, like internal states and how to be and be in this world, but not of it. That's a classic teaching. A lot of us get caught up in the emotions that we're feeling, and we don't realize it's stuck emotions from past experiences. So like when you trigger me by saying something, it's not that that statement is angering or it's offensive. It's the stuff that is inside of me that's from past experiences that I never healed that is coming up and being triggered in that moment. And it was a total realization for me that I do this all the time, even with like the kids. And I'm sure you can see this as well. Like if you have a stressful day at work, or let's say you're not healing that part of yourself, even the inner child, right? Like when your kids act up in a moment, right? Like you have this triggering reaction, whatever that may result in, that's something that's from the past. Like, and your inner child is like trying to talk to you by, through your child who's in the moment right now. Like, so for me, it was an awakening in that we are not our emotions. We're not our thoughts. We are that conscious awareness making it a decision. And there's a great physicist. His name is Thomas A. Campbell, and his definition of is it consciousness, or I think it is consciousness, or maybe what we are is basically conscious awareness making decisions. That's it, right? And I agree with that. If you want to call it source, if you want to call it God, we are that awareness. We are that powerful. We've just been programmed to think that we're not. And I've seen little things like come into my life of like manifestations of like little stuff, right? Like I can manifest the smallest thing and not even think, two thoughts about it, right? But the harder stuff, right? It's the attachment to it that I believe, this is just my subjective experience, is that, the harder stuff to manifest is the things that you have attachments to. And there's some type of like subconscious resistance there that, whether it's limiting beliefs or what have you, is what's restricting you from actually getting those things. So like, I love his book, Letting Go, because it really like gave me a deeper dive into his perspective, especially like with muscle testing and the levels of consciousness. Like I think what 200 is, I can't remember what he says 200 is. Maybe it's courage. I really resonated with that.
Yeah.
And the higher states of like, the next one was like being neutrality, where you're just kind of like, if I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. I feel myself going more towards that and just allowing life. Like if it's meant to be, the universe will provide it. If it's not, then it wasn't meant to be. Like I'm just here, right? Like I feel like I can manifest when I want, but what if, what is that want, like just in an attachment. So I don't know. I think we're on a similar path, right? Because I see your social media and I just love your posts. We both have families, which leads me into my next like question for you. Like, how are you going to raise your boys, right? Like, because it's a tough environment to raise them in, like saying that they're God. And, my kids go to Catholic school. So it's like,
Yes. Yeah, great. Well, my son goes to a religious school as well. And we have conversations, and I talked to one of my mentors about it, because some of the things he said, though there was nothing really like wrong about it in my mind, it was also like I just wanted him to leave curiosity in, because we say like we pick up things from like our teachers, preachers, and family, and she said he will, because you keep having conversations with him, so I think, one of the things that helps me feel better about, everything that's going on in the world and having young kids and whatnot, is that I do believe our souls choose to come in, and I believe that they have purpose here. And so I'm like, well, these two little boys like chose me as their mom, and they chose to come in during this time, being pregnant during 2020. I joke that the easiest thing I did was have a baby in 2020, let alone trying to keep businesses rolling and all of that. And so, I think a lot of it is we're breaking so many, everything is kind of like in breakdown right now. It's like new things are being birthed, but also like structures as we knew them, or at least it seems to me, are cracking at their foundation. And some of them, I am okay with them falling, but in the midst of it, it feels like there's a lot of chaos. And so I think kids that are young enough to be fluid enough to just roll with things, they're probably going to handle it better than we are. And I think, most of us grew up maybe putting our parents on a pedestal and many other things, not recognizing we're all fallible. We all have our own, I guess, like learning curves to go through. So I think some of that too is helping to be more transparent and vulnerable with your kids as appropriate. Not putting it on them, but also letting them know, like, you're not perfect and you're not asking them to be perfect. And
Sure.
I hope that's, ask me in 10 years, Trey, where I'm at with some of this, but yeah.
Well, yeah, as I hear my kids in the background screaming, I think it's open-mindedness, right? Like just allow them to be open-minded about where they want to explore. Allow them to experience life. Like going back to your point, like of sin, right? And goodness. Like they're both needed in our development. Like we need sin just as much as we need greatness because it's how we grow. Like if you just had greatness, you just, what growth would there be? Like it's just like
Right. And the contrast in, whatever you want to call it, in chiropractic, we call it subluxation. And I realized when we were saying subluxation, to me, it's like sin. It's the darkness. If sublux means less light, like it's all saying the same thing.
you need them both. You need total opposites of the magnet to create growth. I mean, it's just that's how I view it now. It's not good or bad. It's just growth. I experience good emotions. Sometimes I experience bad emotions, but as a human being, yes, I want to experience more good than bad because that's just how I'm physically wired. But I feel like the bad, like, if I get to that point where my inner states are neutral, right? There's bad stuff doesn't really affect me anymore. I can't remember who said it, but they could be smiling in the middle of hell and still be in this calm state of mind and emotion. And I think for me, that's a good goal. I mean, to be not non-affected like by external states. I mean, not a lot of people can say that. Like stress. I mean, look at the pandemic, right? Before the pandemic, how we were operating, and then it took a pandemic for us to realize that, man, it's nice to have some calmness in our lives, right? Like to chill out and kind of hang out with the fam. Like even though we're going through a crazy pandemic, if you want to call it that, right? But I think it's a reset
Yeah.
or something higher, throwing a curveball at us to kind of realize what we truly are. I think it's very important that one, we realize that good and bad is subjective. It's needed for growth. And I think once you realize that, you get to a point where you just want to experience things. So like we come into this life, right? To experience.
Yeah. And that speaks to the healing, right? Is that sometimes we have to have these significant contrasting events, whether that's like an experience internally or symptoms that are happening or some sort of diagnosis. But many times if we can take the bird's eye view on various things that have happened, it's like that was transformational to what came next. Now, I get that from our limited human view, sometimes it's really hard to accept that. But I have found in my life that if I don't hold so tightly to my perspective, that there is many times you can see the view a little bit bigger, where like something really good comes out of the things that we've labeled really bad too. So, when somebody's laying on my table, for example, one of the things we try to do our best with how we explain things is like, I'm not trying to take your pain away. That is presumptuous to begin with, but also I don't know why it's there. Is it there because you need to make a move in your life and that pain is like your wake up call for it? So
It's funny you say that too, because Dolores Cannon said, I don't know if you know who she is, uh, that the higher self would, you know, the only way it can communicate with us is through the body and through the pain. So to give you something to say, hey, look, something's going on in your life that you need to fix.
I believe that. And I think this is how I explain it to like our members or our patients that come in, is that especially when there are some pretty major things happening, so like your body is your true north. We can avoid many mental, emotional situations, and it's going to show up in the body. And so when we learn to listen and get curious, and maybe even I have a friend who's an MD, and she had the label of cancer at one point, and that radically transformed her life. And she said, I had to make the decision to love my cells. And it was like that's that, how do you love your cells when you've been told that they're going to kill you?
Well, to your point, right? Love your cells, but also, I mean, that essentially points the finger back saying love yourself. And there's been many meditations where I've said to God, to the universe, I love you. And it said back to me, if you love me, you love yourself. But do we truly love ourselves? Mm-hmm. Like, can you say that you truly love yourself? Like, unconditional self-love, mm-hmm. and what that feels like. I don't know if I could say yes to that.
Mm-hmm. We place a lot of judgments on ourselves. Yeah, I think I'm working on it. I think I do love myself, but when you say unconditionally, that's the, it's like, I love 99%, but I think actually my mom passed earlier this year, and that has been transformational for me, because I'd say a lot of my dark, or the things I didn't want to acknowledge just bubbled right to the surface after that, of like really sitting with some things that I had not wanted to look at in my own emotional states, and actually letting them be there was healing. And instead of trying to be like, nope, it's not there, and I'm okay. And, it was like, no, I'm not okay. And I'm not able to live like this anymore. And I need some space. And I had many of these thoughts previously, but I wouldn't allow them for myself. So I'm getting better at accepting myself, I would say, in a way that doesn't put as many judgments on myself. Yeah.
How does that heal us when you let it sit? Like I've always wondered that. Like if I just let it sit instead of, expressing it, right? Instead of just expressing it in a physical sense of like hitting a pillow or raging out, like how does sitting in your emotional state heal that? I mean, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
The way I kind of look at things is pull it back to the energy behind it. If before I was avoiding it, it was like right here, because I wasn't letting it have its space within me. And so because of that, it's like the thought process just would always go there and then be pushed away. So it's almost like in trying to push it away, you make it bigger, right? It expands it. And I think when we can accept ourselves, like maybe this isn't going to change. Maybe this is just who I am. Maybe this piece of me that I wish was different is just me, right? Like that's a different frequency towards yourself than what it had been. And that to me is you're not fighting yourself then, therefore the like energy that's coming off of that is healing.
Sure. So the more that you resist it, the more energy you give it, so it just compounds. Whereas if you let go of the rope, there goes the energy along with that effort of actually trying to resist it, and now you're free.
Yeah. And so it's like the things we want, like we think we'll be happy when, or we need this thing to show up in our life. So many times it seems like it's almost like a joke, sort of, where you have to go almost opposite of it sometimes in order for that circumstance to then come around, because it's like the wanting of it and it not being there keeps spiraling out the lack or the like negative thought, and it pushes it away. And then the acceptance of almost like, maybe I will never have that, or maybe this just is how it is, or maybe I need to let go of whatever expectation. And then all of a sudden the thing can come in.
Hmm.
you know.
Well, how do you manifest? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I write a lot, like um with with having small kids, I write less than I used to, but I would say on a weekly basis I write in these books probably 3 or 4 times a week, like ideas I have, what my kind of vision is for what I'm trying to work on, and I just write it out in like affirmative language, and so writing is powerful for me. I definitely think when you one of the first questions you asked is like, how are you working, or how do you bring your spirituality into your life? And I think part of that now is that I realize like everything is spiritual and everything is manifesting, whether I'm working on it or not. And so really wanting to keep my state where I desire it to be. And that is one of the best ways to go about manifesting, even if you're not intentionally creating something specific, by just, not letting yourself go in to those dark spaces more than, like if you've been hanging down in grief and shame and you can express anger, that's actually a movement up the scale, right? That doesn't mean we're not going to dip back down, but it's like meditation, like where you may feel the trigger and you consciously can choose to come back to that neutral point, or even like find joy in the experience somehow, like, oh, yay, I get to learn again,
Sure.
Um, so that to me is how I really try and look at this, is I want to be learning and growing through like conversations, books, seminars, etc., and then implementing it into how I'm going to bring that into the different things I'm working on, and then just really enjoy life so that I'm staying hopefully in a place that allows things in as I work on it.
I love that. Yeah. The resistance to like even accept life if it doesn't bring you what you really desire, like that's, because I don't know. I feel like if I just keep trying, I'll get it. If I focus harder, if I work harder, I'll get it. But that's just the human condition, like that's my human nature.
One of my mentors has taught me some about dimensional work. And I think this is an important part for us to realize, is that, the 3D world, our bodies, this book, this computer, is one aspect of our experience. And then there's like 4D, like our thoughts and emotions, and even being aware of them. So I can vividly remember like where the shift in my life went from like paying attention to my thoughts and emotions, and it's almost like the record stopped and my life started, from that point on. And that point before that, there was a lot of junk happening in my world and I wasn't conscious. And then there's like 5D, which is like we're all interconnected, and almost like, we think about the cells of our body, and maybe these cells make up my kidney and this cell makes up my stomach. Do they know that they're connected into a human body? I don't know. I'm not that conscious point, I'm Lona, but I have to imagine that if we could pan out macrocosm, like you and I are probably part of the same organism somehow. And so when we recognize that and we can kind of like get in that space and manifest from there, then when we take action in the 3D world, it is like a lot quicker, I think.
Sure. So I've always thought that, or just felt, I shouldn't say thought, I felt like if you envision it, right, and feel it, that it will naturally attract to you, because we're in this energetic field where we have these energetic bodies that, a law of attraction, if you want to call it that, or just even just kind of like lining up with the universe. I feel like it will bring it towards you. And but again, going back to the resistance to wanting it too much and having that attachment, that's what pushes it away, because that's an automatic feeling of lack. If you keep just feeling like you don't have it, if you got to feel like, and I know people have heard this, that you see it all the time, like you got to act like you already have it, right? And that's key, because it's that feeling that you've already accomplished that, or you've already received that's sending out to the universe. And then the universe, it might not be picture perfect, your plan, however that manifests, but it will give you something similar. It's happened to me in my life. Like I knew that we wanted to build a house. I didn't know what it looked like, but I knew that I wanted my office to have two windows in it, and I was facing out from my desk, and I could see the road. And that's exactly what I have. I didn't imagine that this house exactly the way it is today, but I imagined myself sitting in an office with a desk similar to this, and I'm looking out two windows, and boom, there you have it. I mean, there's been multiple examples in my life where I manifested something, maybe not exactly the way that I thought. Maybe I wasn't even conscious to it then, though. I was just thinking I would like to have these things, and then I just let it go, and they came.
Right. And I don't think we have to be conscious. That was part of when I learned about law of attraction, I learned about manifestation. I thought it was at first, I thought it was when I sit down with my pen and paper and I write out these goals and da, da, da. And then I realized, no, we are walking, talking law of attraction by the nature of being born into a physical body and having an energetic pull through you. So it's why when you have a bad morning and it spirals into a bad day, law of attraction works no matter what set point you're at.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely, I feel, yeah. I mean, it's, oof, it's all in how, like, going back to your internal emotional states, like how are you dealing with those? And I think that has a lot to do with it, because I can see myself being easily influenced by my external states, or situations, and having a direct effect or correlation with my internal state. And then then you'll see it. You'll just see one thing after another lead to another, lead to another. And I just kind of sit back and smile and just say, yeah, I know I'm creating this. I know that I'm doing this to myself.
Yeah.
It's just being conscious of it. I wasn't conscious of it before.
Right.
I just thought it was that this is the universe happening to me. Now I know that I'm doing this, and this is the result from me.
And that's what my friend Lisa would say is like, you moved into 4D. You became consciously aware of your thoughts and emotions, and then when we become consciously aware as like our dominant state, that like whoever's showing up in our world is us, right? Like they are us.
But just think about that, right? Like I'm like my awareness, right? Not Trey, the personality, the brain, right? But my awareness, if I get silent enough and I close my eyes and I get to that state of like just pure nothingness, that awareness, like that's coming through you, like your lens, right? And that awareness is experiencing your experience through Lona. And that my awareness is a chiropractor over there, right? Like it's just that there's this huge veil where I just can't connect with that. And it creates this feeling of duality. But when you can get out of the body, like a lot of people talk about in near-death experiences, and what else? OBEs and crazy, insane meditation states, they're able to connect back with that collective. And then they're just kind of like, oh crap, like we really are all connected. Like we are.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't had that. I personally have never had that happen to me. Like, but again, I've been in those states through meditation where it's just nothingness, right? There's no thoughts, but there's an awareness, and I can catch it. Like I can get quick glimpses of this awareness that are just, I can't even describe it. There's no words. Have you ever been there? Like, have you ever had those experiences?
Where I feel super connected. Yeah, I think practice for me is connection, because it's easier almost to hold that with someone you don't know their story for and just feel them. And I get to like touch people all day long, so I'm like enmeshed in their energy. But actually, with my mom's passing this year, there was a couple experiences that happened right when she was in that transition between life and death, where she was like in between, that were fascinating to me. And my mom had a really slow death essentially, and she was on hospice for a long time. And one of the things that was like, I had no explanation for it. And, with my awareness and spirituality and faith in like this interconnection between all of us, I'm so grateful that I got to watch what was going on, because it kind of, again, just solidified that like, I think all things that are happening, even the stuff that is gut wrenching, is meant for us. And, my mom's life and then her slow decline taught me more than probably anything has. in what I can control and what I can't control, and who's really got the power. And then also when she was on, I think so she died on a Tuesday. So I think this was Saturday, the Saturday before. And, hospice had been coming. And, my dad and I are like, how is she living? Because she hadn't ate or drank for like a really long time. And so my son, Jack, my oldest, his first year of his life, he was with my mom like every other day at least. And it was before she got really ill. So anyways, he had been really sick for like 3 or 4 days while she's in hospice, about to die. And I've never seen the kid sick like this before. So he had been puking. He was, having diarrhea, like he could not keep fluids down. He could not. And it was weird. I'd not seen that from him before. He started to look really ashen. And so I started to get pretty worried. I'm like, I don't know, like, this is odd. It's not like him. And, so I went in to visit my mom for an hour before bedtime, and she is like eyes closed. And my dad had told me she was starting to say some stuff that didn't make sense to him. And so she greeted me, and then she closed her eyes again, and a few minutes went by, and she said something about a hammock. Okay. There's no hammock in her room, and there was, nothing by her window. So I was like, okay, just listening, curious. And then, a couple more minutes went by, and she sits up and she goes, bye-bye, Jackie, bye-bye. And then she lays back down, and I said, Mom, like Jack's not here. And she looks at me and she's like, I know. And then like fell back asleep. And then my husband had texted me, like, tell your mom I'm thinking of her. That's what the text said. And I said, hey, Mom, Kyle's praying for you. So I changed what he had like texted, and she looks at me and she goes, that's not what your phone says. And I was like, okay. So I get home that night. Jack's like ravenous. He's eating, drinking, everything. Like I had left him an hour before. He still hadn't kept anything down. Like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, did her energy say goodbye to him and like cut some sort of like connection or make it okay? And that's why he's eating and drinking. I don't know. It was just very odd timing. So she passes, and it was maybe a night later that Kyle, who my husband's had, he's a construction worker. He like tolerates a lot of what I talk to him about, but like most of the time is like, I know he's listening. He kind of tracks what I'm saying, but he doesn't, it's not like he's reading these books or whatever. And
he's rolling his eyes.
he like tolerates it, but he's not going to be the one to like volunteer the information usually. And so he'll have dreams, and he always has. We've been married 10 years. He'll have dreams where he'll say like, I had one of those dreams again, like where it's almost like a prophetic dream. And he's like, I dreamt of your mom, and I know it was your mom. And it was her voice, and she was up in this like star plane, and he drew out the like layout of the geometry of the stars of how they were. And so I knew like he was confident in what he saw. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's like, somehow she's like, I'm telling you, Lona, I think she's in lights or she's in the stars or something is set up like this. It was one of those dreams. And the other dreams he's had like have been very like he dreamt about Jack before we had Jack. He dreamt about one of his family members passing before they passed. Like, and so I was like, I don't know what's happening, but I'm curious enough to believe that like, we don't get it. We don't have it all figured out. And like, whatever is wherever my mom is, I believe she's part of everything still. And maybe it's not as the form of Nola anymore. Obviously that was her name, but I don't know. It's just fascinating, really. Sure. That's what I think I love about healing is like you can stay open enough to become fascinated. And if we would just do a better job, I think, of studying the miracles or studying the healings that do occur, I think the game of understanding how to heal would radically change,
Oh my gosh. Like that, I'm so fascinated with hypnotherapy just for those simple reasons of tapping into that collective unconscious that Jung talks about, and Edgar Casey, Dolores Cannon. Like I'm fascinated with her work, the QHHT, and some of the stories she talks about where, I mean, I don't know if you ever read some of her books, but they're just fascinating. Like I mean, not to get too woohoo or too out there. I mean, talking about
I like woo out there. It's all good.
Well, I didn't know, I don't know how people feel. I mean, she's talking about ETs, like she's talking about like star seeds and things like I'm something that I'm not really familiar with, but like now that I am after reading some of her literature, but it's coming from different people from all over the world, and they're like kind of going in and like continuing upon each other's stories, and it's like, how can this happen? How can people go into these different altered states of consciousness, tap into some source, and start saying information that is very similar to other people that live 5,000 miles away. And like they're just continuing on each other's stories, just like with your mother, right? Like connecting with Jack and um, seeing the cell phone, not seeing the cell phone. Like there's just something like so real
Yeah.
that we just are not aware of. And I think we can tap into it through meditation, but there's still this, because of this human body, and because we have, we feel like we've experienced everything from a young age in this body. Like we think that we are this body, the five senses. We haven't experienced anything outside of that. And when we do, people just discount it, like, oh, you're not your imagination. That's just, come on,
Hmm.
but what if our imagination is our power?
I love that. Hmm.
What if our imagination, it's not just creativity, it's our direct link to God.
Mm-hmm.
But people just say it's just your imagination. But so we believe it. And so what else is there? I mean, that's the kind of thoughts that I have. What is death? What is it really death? If we're consciousness, there's never death. It's just a transition. So like your mom, right? Like you have this emotional connection and attachment to this physical body that is your mom, because you've been told your entire life this is your mother. You came from her. You had this direct connection with her, but she passes, but you still have the connection with her. She's never gone. Like I guarantee, your husband had a connection with her,
Yeah, I
communication
actually
with
had
her.
a dream 2 weeks after her funeral where my cell phone in the dream rang, and it was her voice on the cell phone. And it was like the second I got the phone up to my ear, it just started like strobing light at me, and my whole body felt like it was pulsating. And I woke up from it and I could still feel like light in my body. And I was like, I know that was my mom. And I am not someone that dreams, even especially because I've been a nursing mom for like the last like 6 years of my life. So, when I sleep, and I don't really recall a lot usually. So I was like, I don't know what that was, but it was
Sure.
bizarre,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, I think, I think part of it is people have to be willing to like let go of their fear of just like the not knowing, because we're not going to know. And to feel like we do know is sort of almost ridiculous. Also, to think that there's nothing else in the universe besides us is also, to me, just like laughable at this point.
Sure.
Um,
I mean, you look out there. I mean, look out in the stars and you just see this. Like it wasn't too long ago that we thought that the Earth was flat, and I'm sure there are still people that think that. And just our philosophy on the orbits of the planets. Like everything has changed so much, right? Like I mean, who knows what's really true, right? Because
exactly.
I mean, who knows? And that's the philosophy. I try to keep an open mind about everything. I try to have like a healthy dose of skepticism, but it's also like, you know, I go my truth, um my truth is my truth,
Hmm.
and I feel it. My heart, I know when I hear the truth. Like my heart center gets like vibrating, very powerful, very warm. Like I just, when I hear something, and you got to think about everybody's subjective lens too. Like, I love channels, I love mediums, I love all of that, but it's also like coming through their lens too. Like, so, I mean, I know that it is truth in some aspect, but it might not be my truth, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, because we're all not going to be the same. That's not, I don't believe. I think that also is like just like the kidney cell is not the same as the liver cell, like it's
Sure.
not supposed to be.
But that's
Um,
like with religion too. It's like, what if there's no like one religion? What if, and Neil Donald Walsh said this in his, I think what his God Solution book. He made the he made the remark like, what if we all just started our own religion? Like you have your own little belief system, and I have my own little belief system, or my own religion, my own spirituality, and I just go off of that, my truth. That's it.
Yeah. I
You know,
mean, kind of what's happening, I think.
you think? I
I
think
do.
so.
I think even if, again, even if we're not aware of it, we all have unique sets of beliefs that have been influenced by lots of different things that we don't realize is running our lives, you know?
Sure, but I love experimenting with like truth and like what is that? What is consciousness? Like, like for you, right? Like I would highly recommend that you really experience with meditation and connecting with your mom, right? Like she's recently transitioned. And I think you would have some phenomenal experiences where, um, through meditation, just visualization of, getting into that altered state of consciousness and having a conversation with her. This has happened to me with my grandfather who's deceased, and he's been deceased since I was a young boy. And I remember going into a meditation where I go into an elevator or stairs or something like that. I can't remember now. And we have a conversation, and he hands me like a pocket knife, right? Like an old fashioned country boy pocket knife. And it had wood, and it had like the shark like looking thing on it, like the eye where you put your thumb in there and pull it up. And I never thought anything of it. And like maybe a month later, I don't know why he gave it. He gave it to me because he told me that he wanted me to like, chop down my path or make my path. There was like, imagine woods, and I'm sitting there with this pocket knife, like cutting my own path, right? So I just took it for what it is. It means that I had to create my own path and do my own thing. And like a month later, like I'm walking down the stairs, and there's this pocket knife. I have no idea where it comes from, like at all, right? Like
Love that.
it's the same thing. It's the same thing he just gave me. And then
Yeah.
I read a book that says we can do these things. We can go to these spaces in our minds and altered states of consciousness and connect with our past loved ones. And we can manifest things. Like they can give you a gift. Just try it, like, and see what happens. Have a
Yeah.
meditation with your mom and ask her to give you a gift and see if it comes up in your reality. Like I would be so fascinated to see what happens.
All right. I love that. I've laid on the like basement floor and just like talk to her in meditation and let go of just some of the suffering that was there. But I love that, like the idea of like a gift. That's fun.
Like I've heard, it doesn't have to be exactly that gift too. Like it come in like, like she hands you a butterfly, and then you go out into your reality and you see like a big sign of a butterfly, and you're like, holy crap, things that subtle. But I mean, every time we come on this show, we have like deep diving conversations. Like,
My dad has this house that my parents had a Christmas tree farm, and so a friend of ours helps him clean the house now. Like she goes and cleans his house and whatnot. And so she was there, and her father passed this year too. So like her dad passed maybe like right around the same time my mom passed. So we'd get breakfast and talk about things. And anyway, so she's in the house. This is like now like probably 7 or 8 months after my mom died. And she goes on the window, and there's like perfect wings on the window. Like I still don't really like, she's like, maybe a bird. I don't know. But so she took a picture and she sent it to my dad, but it was like, it looked like an angel wing, like you would see on like porcelain or something. And there was two of them. And so I was like, the bird had to either like literally have its wings out, like, and have the most perfect things, or she's like, no, I think there's like an angel coming here, And I was like, oh, I just love that. I love, like, why not? I think we
why
just,
not?
right.
Why not? Lona Cook, why not? How can people reach you? How can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on social media. And so probably the easiest, if you like wanted to connect for something, my website is drlonacook.com. LONACOOK. And you can reach out on there or find us on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks
This
for
has
having
been fun. Thank you so much,
me. Yeah.
Lona.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Trey.